empezar con la mayor.
The bulk of my presentation, I want to share something about me, where I come from in the United States, sort of like tell you where my experience and my analysis comes from. I grew in the south of the United States, in this red state that you see on the map, Alabama. And if it sounds familiar, it might be because this is where the headquarters of Drummond is. And also historically, Drummond mined coal in Alabama, my state, and it also ruined the environment there. Okay, anyway, I just wanted to describe briefly some experiences and some pictures of the abuse of human rights and abuse of the environment in the south of the United States. Here, on the picture on the left, I know that, well, it looks like a picture of slavery from some other century, but it's actually a picture from this century. And in fact, the people that you see walking in line there are prisoners in a prison of the state of Louisiana, and they're obliged to work for free or just for a few cents per hour for private corporations while being in prison. This is a big problem that we have in the United States. And I also want to share with you another experience that I'm very familiar with, which is the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. I don't know if you recall this oil spill that BP had a few years ago. Also, in my area in the United States, we get a lot of hurricanes, and they're getting increasingly stronger because of climate change, of course, caused mostly by the multinationals. But why am I sharing all this with you? First of all, to let you know more about me and my analysis, and also to show that these issues of corporate impunity with the state being an accomplice is something that happens everywhere around the world.
And also to show you that even in the global north, in this case the United States, it's less complex to make companies or corporations accountable where they have their parent company in the country, but we haven't been able to solve impunity. And we also have a lot to learn from other struggles and situations in other countries like Colombia. Let's. I would like to share now about Corporate Global Accountability Lab, where I work and I'm a lawyer. We have a focus on the corporate accountability for human rights and environmental rights, and also in international supply chain. Why do we do this? Because as you know, there's a lot of impunity, especially corporate impunity, when the harm done happen outside their own country. So we, as an organization, develop new strategies or innovative strategies because, as we all know, there are not enough tools to face that impunity.
Recording stopped.
Well, we focus basically on civil responsibility that could be that could result in financial remedies to the communities affected. Because of international companies, we're not really. I'm not an expert in the Colombian context, but we work in different countries around the world, and we know quite well what are the immunity patterns of corporations with respect to violations to human rights, labor, and the environment. I wanted to share a few pictures that we have. On the left, there's a project that we have in India where there are many labor abuses and environmental abuse. They have prawn crops in India. And the picture in the middle is a lawyer, a friend of mine, or a colleague who has worked with a community in Ivory Coast where they produce cocoa for multinational, chocolate multinational. Many of those are American companies that do not pay a good salary to have a dignified life to the workers. And the last picture that I wanted to share, there's a union in Dominican Republic of the sugarcane sector, and they're struggling and fighting for their environmental rights and and human rights of their own families. As I said, I'm not an expert in Colombian topics, but we have worked in this context. I just wanted to share some of the work that we have conducted. We have provided evidence on the financing or corporate finance of the main companies that we've talked about, for example, Chiquita, Drummond, Prodeco, and Dole. And the evidence suggests that they have financed the armed groups in Colombia. Because we, as an American, as a U.S. organization, why did we decide to give information to a Colombian institution when communities are known, NGO and Colombian NGOs know very well their information in Colombia? Well, maybe, as you probably know by now, these organizations in the United States, there have been cases there have been cases filed about these companies in the United States, and not all of them have been completed, but in most of them we have provided evidence that has been accepted by the courts in the United States. So it's interesting because we saw all the evidence that the U.S. courts had accepted as evidence that could be evidence, and we gave them to the head, to the Colombian legal system, the Special Justice for Peace in Colombia. And maybe you could use this evidence also here in Justice for Peace. We have also supported the Chiquita case, and I will talk to you a little bit about, and at the end of my presentation. I can't. I'm not. I can't. Well, I wasn't one of the persons involved in the litigation, so I can't take credit because of that win. But so you already know who I am and who is Cal, and I wanted to provide you with some specific resources that, from our perspective, they could be useful for you when you're putting in place strategies for corporate accountability. So first and foremost, a tool that you could use are databases. And we have discussed about these databases from national systems, regional systems, like the Inter-American system, and global systems such as that one. On their websites, they have databases of pertinent decisions that could help you. Another resource that you could use and could be useful would be to connect to NGOs in Colombia and abroad, like Colombian NGOs and NGOs, international NGOs who are in Colombia. I just wanted to share that from our office, what we could offer, it's a memorandum of legal options. So if you have a case and you want to learn a little bit more about the legal options abroad or in the global system, maybe you could contact me or any of my peers, and if we have something to add or if we have inputs for you, we will give you a memorandum of options. Obviously, this is for free. We'll do it at no cost. I also wanted to talk to you about a resource with which I have experience, and it has helped me quite a lot, which is the American Association for the Advancement of Science, or AAA. In fact, they have a project that connects U.S. scientists with scientists from all over other countries around the world to provide their experience or their expertise with human rights. I don't know if I made myself clear, but they could be expert opinion where you need evidence, for example, on health impacts because of mining exploitation. And they do their work free. I know the person who directs the program, and he speaks Spanish, so you can contact him directly. Another resource that ACAL has given us to find new strategies or the innovation of new strategies is to learn from other impacted communities or from corporate abuse in other regions around the world, and with lawyers that are struggling or fighting for those affected communities. I get some brief examples that I wanted to share that we've done, and I think they could be an example of more possibilities. These are two projects. The first one, it's a project that we conducted with some Colombian peers, with the Justicia and La CINEP and the South African Commission, where we work closely with people who had been impacted and lawyers of social justice. And we had intensive sessions with them for about a year. And what we did was share experiences of the for the corporate accountability under conflict situation. And I think this was really important to innovate on new strategies. And at the end of that project, we divided ourselves into groups by people and different jurisdictions around the world. And those small groups, they created new projects where they could test new strategies around different places around the world. And another example of that idea of sharing and learning from other communities and from other lawyers around the world, it's a project that we called Skillshare, which is a place to share what we know, our skills. And this year, we are helping facilitate an exchange between Colombian lawyers and South African lawyers. This is really interesting because, as you probably already know, in the South African context, they have many successful cases against multinationals for gold mining. They have been very successful in showing the impacts on health more than anything else, and they have managed to find significant remedies in terms of money. And so we now have this sharing of the South African lawyers could learn from Colombian lawyers and vice versa. I think that in this afternoon we're going to talk a bit more about financing, So I would like to continue with the end of the presentation. So let me talk a little bit about financing then. From our experience, the truth is finding a finance for cases that are of our interest has been really difficult. Why? Because many of the foundations, they want to see a case ready to be, and what really requires a lot of financial resources is finding experts and interviewing victims. That's where we really need the financial resources. And sometimes some nonprofit organizations, they want to see a more advanced case. However, Stage Fund has its foundation that has been quite interested in cases in Colombia that relate to multinationals. So please find the requirements for State Fund. I don't know if I have more time, but I wanted to talk also about the case of Chiquita. And I know that a few days ago, the court decided in favor of the victims and plaintiffs of the case. Why? Because I think that that example could show that there are more possibilities for litigations against multinational that create havoc or harm in other countries like Colombia. I don't know if I have time, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the Chiquita case. This case is quite lengthy and complex. I'm not going to explain everything in detail because I wasn't part of the litigation group that filed the case. I just want to share what I understand as a lawyer from the U.S. The brief story of Chiquita, I guess you already know that in 2007, after an investigation from the DOJ, Department of Justice of the United States, Chiquita admitted that it was guilty from financing paramilitary groups in Colombia during 1997 to 2004. But something that is really important about this case is that the Department of Justice, it was only a preliminary investigation for financing a terrorist organization such as the AUC. It had nothing to do for human rights violations, but the fact that they financed a terrorist group, and that led to a fine of $25 million that Chiquita had to pay. But more importantly, is that this money went to the DOJ in the United States, did not go to any victim or families that were impacted by the actions of Chiquita. So after that decision, that fine, many American organizations filed lawsuits with respect to this case in different states of the United States. That was back in 2006 and 2007. So they filed cases with around 6,000 people who are victims or family of victims that were killed by AUC, the paramilitary group in Colombia. After a series of boring and complex legal proceedings, these cases became just one case, and they all came together in the federal court of Florida. And so the case followed only under three legal theories that if there are lawyers here who would like to know what it was, but what I think it's really interesting and that could be useful for everyone in this room is that the case made progress on the law of Florida, and it's called death due to negligence. And the Florida state, under their legal framework, judicial framework, they decided to apply Colombian law in the state of Florida. So it was a bit complex. After years of litigation um, uh, and different proceedings, finally in 2017, the court decided to conduct a test that had to do only with 9 victims that had been killed by the AUC. So what does this mean? The court wanted to see whether all those plaintiffs that were around 5 to 6,000, if they have feasible cases. And after lots of litigation, you already know that a few days ago, the judges on this test group of plaintiffs, the judges decided they paid over $2 million for each member of the family of those victims that were killed. What does this mean? It means that the result of the verdict, judge's verdict, it's more or less $38 million only for 9 victims. And what does this mean? That the case proved to be feasible, and now we're talking about thousands of plaintiffs that could file lawsuits against Chiquita. I'm not very good in maths, but we were talking about over $1 billion, so that would be fantastic. And now to wrap up and to conclude my presentation, I just want to say that we can applaud the verdict of the judges, but we still have an issue. The judge has to certify the decision of the jury, and it is possible, but very unlikely, that one of the reasonable jury could not conclude that decision. So I'm going to say that Chiquita is not responsible. That is very unlikely, but we want the judge to ratify the decision of the jury. So I have the verdict here only if we have time to see the verdict. No. Thank you. I just wanted to, before moving to questions, we use the term standing and abating because in international law, the Nuremberg complicity means that the one who's most responsible in some tribunals or courts, it's a higher standard of responsibility. In these processes in the United States, civil procedures, they've used the example of co-helping the responsible people, like aiding and abetting. And that's the idea. Complicity in the Colombian justice system, it means more, it's less. So it's worth clarifying that you're talking about complicity. We're not really talking about the same thing in Colombia. And just to say trying to explain how you put together an evidence is quite complex. But if we know we could go to higher levels of responsibility, of course, if the company is responsible, but many times it's easier to prove a lesser level of responsibility. So then we have an issue. And just to think also, Ivory began to talk about that we need to use all these soft mechanisms. There isn't a criminal framework, international framework. The Criminal International Court does not have jurisdiction, and we have principles, but they don't impose any penalty. They talk about social impact. So I want to clarify this because that explains, I think, the questions that I want you to ask yourselves is why do we have to depend from so many structures? Because to really figure out what Nancy talked about, we need to combine forces and strategies and the different fora to increase the size of that pearl, as Maria Rosa mentioned. Somebody wants to ask questions? Okay, let's take 3 questions and then we'll move on. Hello. Eva, sorry. It's more than a question. It's like an invitation. Of an American company, Dow Chemical of Colombia, I say that in 1989 sprayed Lordspan in the Cartagena Bay, and that chemical generated a very serious damage to the ecosystem, and there were lawsuits were filed, and there was a ruling, which is ruling 080, where they impose, but it's just to restore the ecosystem, but not considering the community as such, where that was the area where people used to fishing in the township of Pasacaballos. Now that money is being fought between the mayor and so they're fighting for the money. So we see that this ruling, considering what you just mentioned, we need to undust this and to clarify this, and the remedies should go to the restoration, should go to the community and to people that have been affected in their livelihood, and those who have not had any damage. They just taking the money from the fines paid by this company on this ruling. I would also like to I have a question. In the township of Rocha in the 2016-2017, there was an oil spill in the Laguna Juan Gomez, where we filed we did a class action to Ecopetrol. We filed a class action to Ecopetrol or People's Action. I think it was 2013, 2014. And to date, we haven't had any response. It was an ecological and environmental damage in the municipality of Rocha, where there were only over 32 trucks that had to collect crude oil. What did Ecopetrol say at that time? That the spill had been provoked by the community, by our community, because they didn't want to pay for ecological, cultural, and environmental damages. The death we had the death of lots of fish after that event. These are things that happen in our communities because we don't have the resources, we don't have the tools to promote these topics. But yes, I would have liked that you, Eva, would get, because we filed all the complaints and please, we would like to have some, because we have no knowledge to today what has been said there because we haven't received any answer.
I have a question regarding Cerro Matoso, taking into account that it's a multinational. This is a nickel mine. Perhaps the company could generate or give us a legal pathway so that abroad, internationally, they can tell us how to go about this process so that they have all the lights and they know how to go through an international process and how to compile the documents that are necessary. We will take one more question from this round and then we will go to the answers. I wanted to ask a question about it's so that I can understand a little bit better. It's about these environmental damage in the south of the department of Bolivar, also due to the use of glyphosate. Why am I mentioning glyphosate? Why am I mentioning the damages? Well, it's because this damage has been very large in the south of Bolivar. They came to spray starting in the year 2000 and it continued up to 2013. And they came twice a year spraying poison. There was a lot of displacement of people, a lot of diseases, and it was damaging the environment and the water and the animals. Why am I bringing this up here? Because what I know is that the company that produces the glyphosate, I think it's in the United States. It's Monsanto. I think it's in the United States. So why do I bring this up here? Because of that. And this is an agreement signed between the government and the United States in order to spray that poison here in Colombia. So I just wanted to get more explanation about this. Well, let me talk about these three cases. Jorge's case, Dow Chemical. That damage is that damage that for the jurisprudence of the Inter-American Court is called of a continued nature. There's still damage to people's health, and there are people that have malformations. So the question, is there room for a lawsuit against Dow Chemical? I think it's known as Talkin today. For that continued damage, I think that those $6 million will not be enough to restore the ecosystems. As to the second one, Yorley's case, damage against the environment, we would like to look at the origin of the company. Is a French company, Suez Veolia and Aguas de Barcelona. Its affiliate is Aguas de Cartagena. You would have to look at the nature of those companies. And in the case of Monsanto and the glyphosate spraying and in the international law against drugs, this is coordinated by the judge of the world, the United States. And we have documents that tell us that all the information lies with the State Department. So if it was the United States that led this international policy, and if Monsanto was American number two, we would believe that there is jurisdiction in an American court, even though Monsanto today is buyer, because the United States led the public policy, and back at the time, the company was Monsanto, an American company. This to clarify this to our peer here.
I think I'll respond in English because I listened to the questions in English to make sure I understood really well. Thank you to all the compañeros that shared your questions and comments. They're very big issues, and I'm not sure I'm going to be able to respond precisely to all of them. If there are any outstanding questions after this conversation, please feel free to reach out. And after Corporate Accountability Lab does a little bit more research, I'd be happy to give you a more thorough answer. But just to respond now, in terms of, I think many of these questions go to, is it possible to sue a U.S. company like Chiquita, now that we have this case? Is it possible to sue them in the United States for impacts in Colombia that are still ongoing? So whether it's Dow Chemicals or whether it's Monsanto or a couple of other of these companies mentioned, would it be possible to sue in the United States? Without understanding all the facts of the case, I would say yes. I mean, there is jurisdiction in the U.S. over U.S. companies, whether they're operating in the U.S. or abroad. What is very difficult is to determine if and when a parent company that's based in the U.S. has enough control over its subsidiary in Colombia or wherever else to be able to sue the parent company in the U.S. This was one amazing thing that happened in Chiquita, is that the courts actually said, yes, there's enough connection from executives and the company in the U.S. to what's going on in Colombia so this case can proceed. That's one of the first times that's ever happened. So yes, I would say possible, difficult, but I personally would love to see it and explore opportunities because I think this Chiquita decision is really exciting. I think in the case of the Bolivar case with glyphosate, was it that case? There's one case that was, oh no, I'm sorry, it was the Rocha case. Well, now I'm getting confused, but the case where there was a class action filed and then the company never followed up, I'd like to know more about where that class action was filed. Was it in Colombia? Was it in the United States? In the United States, even if the case eventually gets dismissed, a company is obligated to respond. They have to legally, or the people involved will see criminal charges or sanctions against them. So I'd like to know more about that case. That's something we could definitely look into more. I guess a final thing, I would say there is a mention of French companies and sort of how they're connected to Rocha. I would say that sounds like a perfect question for Somo and the counter who spoke to us yesterday about their mapping of different companies. I would say that would be a great place to start. That's what I have for now, but if anyone wants to follow up, I can give you more thorough answers once I do some more research. Thanks.
You've got an idea on, so with the, sobre el caso de glifosato, históricamente la aspersión con glifosato que se ha hecho en Colombia se ha hecho con una concentración del químico mucho más alta de lo permisible en Estados Unidos. Y no sé si en base a eso
you could use these arguments before the company, whether in Germany or in the United States.
No sé si
Peter might be able to answer this better than I could, but no, I'm not sure. I would say that, I would assume that most states would say, okay, well, great, if the U.S. does that, we're not the U.S., we have our own standards, and this is a standard under Colombian law. I think, though, that many countries are looking to what others do in terms of environmental standards and levels of contamination that they allow, and so maybe that could have some sort of soft law influence, but in terms of would the Colombian government say that we'll take
colombiano haya dicho que va a tomar
lo
que se hace en otro país, eso sí, no lo sé.
Muy bien. Bueno, no sé si tenemos tiempo, una pregunta más, dos preguntas más.
Y es que la corrupción es el plato
Is the
en el que
dish
se
on which
sirve la
impunity is
impunidad.
served. And impunity is a phenomenon that lies next to the arrival of these multinationals into our territories. And I relate this very much with this multinational, Drummond. Not happy with the mining here, coal for 30 years in Cesar. Not happy with that. Now, as a reward to their criminal acts and these financing of the war right in the heart of Cesar and in general throughout the department, 3 contracts are granted to them to mine yet another fossil fuel, which is the gas that lies in the coal seams, besides all the projections of businesses that they're doing in relation to the so-called renewable energies, the Drummond Energy that produces energy to continue mining coal. And now we have these issue of the coal bed gas extraction, CR 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I was wondering inside my mind, which is in deep unrest, is there a space for advocacy whereby that criminal background of a company could be used to put a stop to its presence in a specific territory? And I'm talking about CESAR here because I'm familiar with it, but we can think of any place around the world. Or is it enough to have these investigations at the GEP or the investigation against this contractor that already happened, and the investigation being done with the attorney generals and statements made by the paramilitaries reaffirming the criminal acts of Drummond, the assassination of union leaders and all these people in the territory because of the armed conflict? Isn't this enough to try, perhaps, to start some action that could put a stop to these prize that they're getting of being able to continue mining in our territory? We have detected that Libro Copper or Libro Cobre is a Canadian company, and its majority investors in the United States are powerful Congress members. One of them of the most important investing families, Tsununu, and a company, Tsiangol, something like that. But anyway, we would like to ask you for information so you can help us and work with us, because the copper mine in Putumayo is projected to be the second largest copper mine in Latin America. And we are not going to allow that. And we will continue banning that, even if they don't like this word ban or prohibition, if they don't like it in the high courts. But that's how it has to be, because life is at stake. We know that in spite of having been suspended, because they suspend themselves, they do not accept that they have suspended them from the civil and individual actions. They have to continue paying certain percentages in the prospection stage that they invented. They just made it up because it's not part of the expiration code. And then come the other stages, exploitation, and we think that they're not paying the Colombian government, and they have to redress and retribute. And I'm sure that the environmental authority has to establish in these days the punishment for having massacred half a hectare. And they're still in conflict with us, and they're still targeting us as the cause of social and environmental conflicts. Yesterday, they were promoting in the village close to where you start climbing the mountain. They have this little local office promoting a jobs fair, and it's even on Facebook and in their newspapers and in the radio programs and television. They're all co-opted, and we write to them, this is an illegal company. Its activity, its commercial activity has been suspended. So those percentages we don't know very well, and we would like to know whether currently they have their insurance policy in effect, They have been requested for an insurance policy that supposedly should redress all the damage, but we don't know if they have that in place. Hearing our colleagues talking about Aguas de Cartagena, I would like to know how feasible is it, or how possible would it be for two territories to get together, to join for the process against the company. Because in Mocoa, this is in Putumayo, we also have problems with this company, Veolia, in the landfill, because the leaching is not being properly treated. This is being dumped in the rivers. There's already damage on our sexual and reproductive rights in women. There are cases of children that have been born with disabilities, cognitive disabilities, etc. So I don't know if it would be possible to have these two joined, because this is Veolia's, this is the parent company. So I would like to know that.
Yeah, thank you everyone for those questions and comments. And again, these are really important and large questions, and so I'll do my best to answer them here, but I'm hoping we can continue this conversation outside of this space. To the question about Drummond and how can this company that's committed so many human rights abuses continue to get mining concessions? I mean, this is a great question, and I think something we see not in Colombia, but around the world. I think from my understanding of Colombian law, the law would have to develop or advance in order for past abuses to say that there's no more, Drummond cannot have any more mining licenses. I would say one example, though, just coming from this Skillshare I mentioned with South African attorneys, is that after apartheid ended in South Africa, which was fueled in large part by extractive companies and the gold and coal sectors, the South African government tried to nationalize all of the mining system. But they backed down because these big multinational companies pushed back really hard. But what's happening now is that with these successful class actions against these gold mining companies that have happened in the last 5 to 10 years, the companies are suffering a lot of reputational damage, which has actually had them respond in ways that are quite surprising. And I would say now that in the sort of post-apartheid system in South Africa, it does seem like companies that continue to abuse human rights and to evade accountability will not get new mining concessions. So I don't know the details of how that's working in South Africa, but that would be a great place to start to see how they've been able to do it. In terms of the Libre Cobre case, again, I don't know the details of this case, but I would say one thing that could be really useful is if there are indeed representatives from US Congress who are investors in this case, it would be super interesting to identify them and maybe have a communications campaign against them. I'm not sure legally what we could do, but we could certainly sort of name and shame them publicly. So that would be interesting. The other thing I would say that Cal has been sort of testing is there is actually a sanctions program in the United States, sanctions that can be entered against people who are seeking visas to enter the United States or who have assets in the United States, like bank accounts or property in the US. And this is actually at the discretion of the State Department or the Department of Treasury. So they aren't obligated to act. But if you make a good case that there was enough corruption or enough human rights abuse, there's a possibility that some specific people will have their visas taken from the US or that their assets will be frozen in the United States. So we could talk more about the possibility of that. That's actually a pretty easy process to submit a petition. You just don't know if the State Department or Treasury is going to act. I think, finally, the case about Aguas de Cartagena and Putumayo, this sounds like a question for the communities to see if they can join together. But I think that is a great idea, and that's an example of innovation, I think, in terms of accountability for multinational companies. Certainly when we're thinking about the financial resources needed to kind of develop evidence and proof of harms, it's always better to have more people so you can kind of spread out the costs, right? So I think that's a great idea, and I would love to see, if you have examples of that moving forward. I think I'll leave it there, but please reach out if you have any more questions, and I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Instrumentos fuertes jurídicos, ¿no? Para encontrar las empresas.
To make companies accountable, but in the case of Chiquita is the first ruling that has reached that stage, but it's a civil process. What does it imply? Although there is evidence that they have financed, they are accused of negligence because it's a civil process. What happens for the Colombian justice? Why did the Chiquita case did not move that ruling? Maybe could give input so that for that process to continue here in Colombia. Likewise, the case of Drummond in the United States. If the case in Drummond would move forward, it would also give us some input here to continue the case here in Colombia. Thank you. With your proposal, we have an experience with Aguas de Barcelona from our work team and the leaders that have accompanied this forum. There are a lot of members here. What we can do is an exchange of phone numbers and to define some work lines, because one way of being able to face corporate power is that for us communities to come together. We have a team of environmental engineers, anthropologists, sociologists, so we can make it. Milena, Jorge, Marilyn, let's think about it.